In the summer of 1859, on a remote island in the Pacific Northwest, a single gunshot would nearly ignite a war between two of the world's most powerful empires. But this wasn't a battle over gold, territory, or political ideology. This was about something far more barnyard. This is the story of how one hungry pig almost triggered a conflict that could have redrawn the map of North America. Welcome to the Pig War. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind to 1846. For decades, the United States and Great Britain had been locked in a diplomatic tug-of-war over the Pacific Northwest. Both nations claimed the Oregon Territory, a massive chunk of land stretching from California to Alaska. American settlers were flooding westward, hungry for land and opportunity. Meanwhile, the British Hudson's Bay Company had established a lucrative fur trading empire across the region. The tension was palpable, and war seemed inevitable. In 1844, American presidential candidate James K. Polk ran on an aggressive platform, 54 to 40 or fight, demanding all territory up to the 54th parallel. It was a bold claim that would have pushed British Canada far to the north. But cooler heads prevailed. Neither nation truly wanted war. In June 1846, they signed the Oregon Treaty, establishing the 49th parallel as the border between American and British territory. Problem solved, right? Not quite. The treaty stated that the border would follow the 49th parallel to the middle of the channel, which separates the continent from Vancouver's island. But here's the catch: there were multiple channels. Between the mainland and Vancouver Island lay a scattered archipelago, the San Juan Islands. Depending on which channel you chose, these islands could belong to either the United States or Britain. The treaty's vague language had created a loophole big enough to sail a warship through. And that's exactly what both nations did. For 13 years, this ambiguity festered. Both American and British settlers moved onto the islands, particularly San Juan Island, each assuming it belonged to their nation. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. By 1859, San Juan Island had become home to about 24 American settlers and the Hudson's Bay Company, which ran a substantial sheep farming operation. The mood was tense but manageable until June 15th. Lyman Cutlar was a Kentucky-born American farmer trying to scratch out a living on the island. He'd planted a potato patch, tended it carefully, and was looking forward to a decent harvest. But he had a problem. A pig, a large black boar belonging to the Hudson's Bay Company, kept breaking into his garden and devouring his potatoes. Cutlar complained to the pig's owner, Charles Griffin, an Irish employee of the company. Griffin's response was less than sympathetic. According to later accounts, Griffin essentially told Cutlar to build a better fence, and that Cutlar would be liable if anything happened to the pig. This did not go over well. On the morning of June 15th, Cutlar woke to find the pig in his garden yet again. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed his rifle, took aim, and fired. The pig fell dead. And with that single shot, Lyman Cutlar had just killed what might be the most historically significant pig in North American history. To his credit, Cutlar immediately tried to make amends. He offered Griffin $10, a fair sum at the time, for the pig. But Griffin demanded $100. Cutlar refused. The Hudson's Bay Company wasn't about to let this go. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutlar and haul him to Victoria for trial under British law. The American settlers, however, had other ideas. The Americans on the island rallied around Cutlar. They'd had enough of British authorities acting like they owned the place. They sent an urgent petition to Brigadier General William S. Harney, commander of the U.S. Army's Department of Oregon. Now, if you wanted someone to de-escalate a delicate international situation, William Harney was not your man. Hot-tempered, impulsive, and openly hostile to British interests, Harney saw this as an opportunity. Without consulting Washington, Harney ordered Captain George Pickett, yes, that George Pickett, who would later lead the disastrous charge at Gettysburg, to San Juan Island with 64 men to protect the American settlers. On July 27, 1859, Pickett and his men landed on San Juan Island and raised the American flag. The message was clear. This island was now under U.S. military protection. The British were not amused. Within days, 3 Royal Navy warships arrived, commanded by Captain Jeffrey Phipps Hornby. He demanded that the Americans leave immediately. Pickett refused. The standoff had begun. Over the following weeks, both sides escalated. By early August, there were 5 British warships mounting 70 guns and carrying over 2,000 men facing off against 461 American soldiers with artillery batteries positioned on shore. It was the most absurd military standoff in North American history. 2 great empires, poised for battle, over a dead pig worth $10. News of the standoff took weeks to reach Washington and London. When it did, officials on both sides were horrified. This was exactly the kind of pointless conflict they'd been trying to avoid. President James Buchanan was already dealing with the escalating crisis over slavery that would soon tear the nation apart. The last thing he needed was a war with Britain over an island most Americans had never heard of. Across the Atlantic, Queen Victoria and Prime Minister Palmerston were equally dismayed. Britain had no interest in war with the United States, certainly not over a pig. Buchanan dispatched his most trusted military diplomat, the legendary Lieutenant General Winfield Scott, hero of the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War, now 73 years old and still serving his country. Scott arrived in October 1859 with clear orders: defuse this situation without firing a shot. He immediately opened negotiations with British Governor James Douglas. Scott and Douglas quickly realized that neither side actually wanted war. They crafted an elegant solution: joint military occupation. Both nations would station a small garrison on the island until the boundary dispute could be formally resolved. And so began one of the strangest periods in military history. For the next 12 years, British Royal Marines and American soldiers would occupy opposite ends of San Juan Island, each defending their nation's claim to the territory. But here's the thing: they got along splendidly. The soldiers from both sides would visit each other's camps, celebrate holidays together, and compete in friendly sporting events. There are accounts of them sharing whiskey and stories around campfires. The British attended 4th of July celebrations. The Americans joined in for Queen Victoria's birthday festivities. It was the most cordial military standoff in history. Meanwhile, civilian life continued. The Hudson's Bay Company kept farming sheep. American settlers kept farming potatoes, presumably with better fences now. The island had effectively become a miniature, peaceful model of international cooperation. Years passed. The American Civil War came and went. The United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. Still, the boundary question remained unresolved, and the joint occupation continued. Finally, in 1871, Britain and the United States agreed to submit the matter to binding international arbitration. They chose an unexpected arbitrator, Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. Why the German Kaiser? He was seen as neutral, powerful, and respected. For a year, Wilhelm and his advisors studied the Oregon Treaty, examined maps, reviewed historical documents, and considered the arguments from both sides. On October 21, 1872, 13 years after Lyman Cutlar shot that pig, Kaiser Wilhelm I issued his decision. The border would follow the Haro Strait, the Western Channel. The San Juan Islands, including San Juan Island, would belong to the United States. On November 25, 1872, the British Royal Marines ceremonially withdrew from San Juan Island. The Americans had won not through battle but through diplomacy and arbitration. Today, both the American and British camps on San Juan Island are preserved as the San Juan Island National Historical Park. Visitors can walk the same grounds where soldiers from two nations lived side by side for 12 years without firing a shot. The Pig War stands as a unique moment in history, a conflict that could have spiraled into catastrophe, but instead became a testament to restraint, diplomacy, and common sense. The only casualty was one unlucky pig. As for Lyman Cutlar, he continued farming on San Juan Island for years after the incident. One can only imagine how many times he told the story of the day his trigger finger nearly started a war. The Pig War reminds us that not all conflicts need to end in bloodshed, that cooler heads can prevail, that sometimes the bravest thing leaders can do is choose not to fight. Today, the border between the United States and Canada remains one of the longest undefended borders in the world, a lasting legacy of peaceful coexistence that began in part, on a small island where two empires chose diplomacy over destruction. And somewhere in the soil of San Juan Island rests one pig who, quite accidentally, changed the course of history.